Hello listeners and welcome to Plugged In, the energy news podcast from Montel, where we bring you the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. Welcome to the fourth episode of our 5-part CEO summer series, where we put the big questions to key energy leaders. Last week, I spoke to Asta Sivinen-Punka, CEO of Finnish TSO Fingrid, about the key issues affecting the region. In this episode, I interview Jarand Rystad, CEO and founder of energy research and intelligence company Rystad Energy. We review the state of the oil markets, the latest nuclear renaissance, and what's next for the Nordics. I hope you enjoy this episode. So Jarand, what are the biggest changes you've seen in your time in the energy sector?
Okay, I've been in the energy sector now actually since the 1980s. But I think the biggest change is the last 5 years where renewables has taken off from being a niche technology till being basically the main technology. And today we are investing more in green technologies than we are in oil and gas. And this is, of course, a big change.
That is huge. So where, for example, where have the biggest changes taken place? And would you say it's across the globe or in some areas where the pace of that development has been faster?
Yeah, I think the shock has been China. 5 and 10 years ago, the issue was that China was growing so fast in coal. And China was, the driver of increased global emissions and all of that. And people were kind of very negative to China in terms of the green shift, that they were the big problem, that they were just burning more and more fossil fuel, etc. Then, 5 years ago, they changed that policy officially. And they said we will reach 1,200 gigawatt of renewables by 2030. And people said that is too ambitious. And they reached that level last year in 2024. So they were 6 years ahead of schedule for a very ambitious. So this is, of course, a big shift. And just to take something very recent, in the first quarter 2025, our data now shows that thermal generation of electricity, meaning oil and coal and gas generation of electricity in China, was down 4% after been growing over the last 10 decades.
And that's the first time it's been such a downturn?
Except from COVID.
Okay.
You had some COVID effects, but except from that, which is clearly economical driven. But from structural point of view, that this is the first time this effects has been there.
I mean, these are phenomenal changes, yeah. And I think, I was talking to a colleague and then we were discussing that, the electricity generation in China was below that of Germany in the 1980s or mid-1980s, and now it's over 20 times above it. So these are huge changes you're talking about. If I stick with China, Jarand, one of the key drivers globally for oil has obviously been China. It's been one of the biggest demand centers for oil. But the explosion of electric vehicles in China has been breathtaking. What is that going to do for global oil demand, in your view?
Yes, you're right. China was the kind of key driver of increased oil demand for the last 2 decades. Every year we could trust China to grow 500,000 barrel or 1 million barrel per year. That is over. China is peaking in oil consumption. It's a debate, maybe this year, maybe next year. We are at a plateau at least. And I think maybe just now in a few years, economical cycles will actually be more important because the structural is going on. So now we have, if it's a strong economic growth or if weather conditions are in a certain manner, it could be a slightly increase and then a slightly decrease again. But for example, gasoline, diesel consumption peak was in 2018. Gasoline consumption peak was maybe last year, maybe this year, but still they're growing in petrochemicals, in naphtha and in some jet fuel also. So we don't really know exactly when it will be. Some people think it's already been, but also I'm open that it could still grow for a few more years.
But it's coming. That's yeah, absolutely. What In terms of coal and gas use in China, what's the outlook there? I mean, you're saying that certainly petroleum and diesel use has peaked, but what about the other fossil fuels?
As I mentioned, the thermal generation of electricity is basically coal and gas. And in addition, you have a use of gas and some coal also for in the industry, for not power consumption reasons. I think gas is starting on a quite low level, actually, in China. So I think natural gas will continue to grow. You also need it as peaking plants to back up some of the renewable electricity system. I think coal is peaking as we speak, also in China overall. Coal is been a blessing and a curse for China. The blessing is basically enabled the industrial growth they have had over the last 2-3 decades. But also it's a curse since it is local pollution, lot of health problems, and you cannot really export it. The technology cannot really export. And that's why China want to get rid of it. And the clean air policies, city after city is going from being with a lot of fog and smog and everything to clean air. And they want that. They want to see more of that. So depends on the regions, but you will see a decline in coal consumption.
In terms of, so you say you've been in the energy sector since the 80s, Jarand, but what has most surprised you over the last, maybe we could stick to maybe the last 15, 20 years, but what is something that's taken you aback? I thought, wow, this is.
Yeah. Again, I need to go to solar, because back in the 1970s, we were open for many versions of the future energy society. We talked about the hydrogen society, that everything, propulsion of vehicles, hydrogen will be the answer to everything. This hydrogen society is never going to happen. You will have some niche applications of hydrogen still, with green ammonia for shipping or e-fuels for aviation and steel making, etc. So there is clearly some markets for hydrogen, but that will be niche market. It will not be the dominant energy carrier. Electricity will be the dominant carrier of energy, and solar will be the dominant producer in combination with batteries.
We've seen in recent years a lot of hype around hydrogen, specifically green hydrogen. There's talk in Germany about hydrogen-ready gas plants. There's talk of like a whole hydrogen network, replacing the gas network. Do you think this is ever going to see the light of day, Jarand?
Yes, I think so, but in less volumes and slightly later. But there is clearly projects happening. Its final investment decision has been actually quite much at the Iberian Peninsula. And then you have some good business models where you have renewable power directly linked to electrolyzers that are placed inside refineries. And then they already have a market for their hydrogen. They can use it basically as a natural part of the refinery feedstocks. And they can they don't need a lot of backup systems or other expensive kind of systems around it, because they already have all the infrastructure for getting hydrogen in other ways than from renewable energy when the wind is not blowing or the sun is not shining. So these cases are actually economically quite sound cases, and this is where we are seeing it, that it's taking off as we speak.
Yeah, I mean they're the kind of the ray of lights in the hydrogen world, if you like, because we're often seeing a lot of cancellations and projects that were announced were sort of slowly being spiked or cancelled. But I think there are challenges. But as you say, there are a lot of use cases of hydrogen, certainly in industry, in some kind of fuels. But
yes,
as it being the magic potion or the panacea, maybe that's a bit more problematic.
Yeah, but we are tracking all of this. I think more than 1,000 hydrogen projects, named projects. And in total, these projects will generate 120 million tons of hydrogen, new green hydrogen, both blue and green. So new low carbon hydrogen, both blue and green. But if we start to risk these projects on the likelihood to actually get the financing to see the final investment decision, we are at a fraction of it. So we can be quite certain about projects now 10, 15 million tons. But above that, all need additional kind of strengthening the business case, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And hydrogen or green hydrogen is certainly not cheap, and the costs are increasing as well.
You need for 1 megawatt, you are producing 18 kilos. And typically the price of 1 megawatt in the market is $100. Maybe the best industrial price is $40-50. So still, it's between $2, $3, and $6-7 per kilo of hydrogen only for the electricity needed. And then you need the capital cost. So it's very hard to get green hydrogen projects below $7-8 today.
No, that's the business case. Absolutely, it's very challenging. So, if we're talking about the energy transition and the energy transition in Europe in particular, Jarand, what do you see as the greatest challenges going forward?
Yes, of course, it's a lot of headwind for the green shift globally, driven by the policies in America. But still, there's some surprising breakthroughs also that has happened. And let me mention a few things that are also related to Europe and inspired by Europe. I think in April, it was a meeting in the International Maritime Organization that for the first time, it was a meeting where it was really hard debate. People voted against or for the proposed proposal. Usually it's only consensus because they proposed a very ambitious target for for shipping to become green and net zero by 2050. Russia and United States walked out of the room. They didn't want to participate. And then this majority of the countries approved a very ambitious plan, basically penalizing fuel oil and regular LNG gradually in a very smart, in a very kind of thought through process, and then promoting, subsidizing bio-LNG and biodiesel, for example, so that from 2028, it's a very good business case for ship owners to use these new type of low carbon fuels. And this was surprisingly aggressive policy in as a part of the green shift. So this and the policy was very thought through. For example, you can use a balance sheet. So if you are over compliant, meaning that you are building a new ship with a better machine than what you need according to compliance, you can pool that into your balance sheet in a way, so that you can be under compliant in the future. And this logic make people want to overinvest from the start, because you can if you're at a very, very early stage, invest in a very green technology, you will have a benefit long term from that. So this is creating a new logic. So I think this could be inspiration for other sectors. But just about Europe, yes, yesterday actually I was in Brussels discussing this with the DG Energy and some of the policy makers there. And they are looking at this, and they're looking at finding similar ways, and they have the same ambitions as they had a year ago or 5 years ago for a green transition also in EU, and to making policies that make it economical sound to invest in all these new technologies. So it's absolutely not dead in Europe, but policy-wise, it's completely dead in the United States at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, when you have the President of the United States first putting a stop to Equinor's big offshore wind power and then restarting again, that does something for investors, does it not? In the country, you're looking at the situation there. You don't know what's going to happen from day to day, and especially in the midst the tariff war. This must make it very challenging to invest in the green transition in the United States. So,
So I think it's more stability and predictability for the Norwegian policies, even if there's still some decisions to be made there. But in terms of renewables, is growing very fast. Of course, still in Europe. I think also Nordic countries I would highlight as a very good case examples. Finland, Sweden, and Denmark has gone from 25 years ago being almost very much relying on fossil fuel and then some nuclear and hydropower. Today, they are 97% non-fossil. And they have made this without major breakthroughs, breakdowns, on their power grid. Not any big outages, and not huge investments. Of course, they have invested quite much, But this just shows that the grid has a lot of hidden capacity. It was designed for peak hours, and it was designed to avoid overheating of all the electrical equipment with many kind of standard deviations of security. So when you are starting to monitor each component and starting more smart grid and smart operations of the grid, you can actually get much more out of the grid than what it was designed for originally. And this is just showing that it is possible to integrate a green power supply into a system without getting too much risks. But of course, we saw what happened in Spain. I was there also just when it happened. That was, of course, a shock to the system.
Absolutely. I want to come back to the Spanish example later, Jarand. But if we stick to the Nordic example, and you've had huge expansion of wind in certain parts of Sweden, Finland, as well as new nuclear plants coming online. But on the other side, you have seen a massive increase in negative prices. So how do you cope with the issue of negative prices in these kind of markets where you have an abundance of renewable energies at the same time of day often?
Yes. And that's a very good point. I just referred to a recent conference I was at, and the first topic was how to deal with the negative prices. And the next topic in a completely different part of the conference were how to deal with the overcapacity of battery production. You see that late?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Of course, that is. It's of course you need to install much more battery energy systems, battery energy storage systems in the grid. This is already exploding. The latest number I saw, it was average cost for the most recently announced plants was $260 per kilowatt hour. Very low. And then you really start to get a good business case to install batteries. And basically, it's been very profitable also, because you are not only doing the daytime arbitrage, you're also doing, grid stabilization, and you get paid for that as well.
The ancillary services, yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. But so batteries are kind of the answer to the issue of negative prices. But if we stick to the topic of batteries, the Nordic region has had a lot of, should we say, with companies going under or moving production abroad. I'm thinking of Northvolt, I'm thinking of Bled and other such companies. What's the underlying issue here? How can that be resolved?
I think it's very difficult to become competitive in a commodity market like this, already led by China and partly Korea. So I think we need to think like we are doing for electronics. So some people say you can never produce electronics in the Nordic countries, but still you have companies like Kitron and others that are quite successful. They are finding niche applications. Low number of units produced, high sophisticated units, niche applications, early alpha series, close to the customers, etc. So, and for example, within maritime shipping, we are building a lot of electric ferries, etc. These are just examples of the kind of production I think we have that we can still do in the Nordic countries. It's very difficult to compete on the mass market.
Well, electric planes even. Yeah.
Yes, we have quite some, short distance planes, they are very well suited actually for electricity.
But maybe if we could touch on some of the headwinds in and if you pardon the pun, I mean, offshore wind is facing some problems. Does it have signs coming from the Norwegian government about it can't be subsidized forever? We've had some cancellations in the UK, other countries thinking twice about investing in offshore wind. What do you make of this? Is this a kind of, is the pendulum swinging against offshore wind, Jarand?
It, of course, is done so for the last 2 years. It was a perfect storm, post-COVID inflation in all the supply chains, combined with increased interest rates, etc. But we have a database for this, so let's be fact-based. We looked at the 2030 potential in Europe, for example. That was 120 gigawatt in 2030 with named projects 2 years ago. Today, it is 98. So yes, it's taken down by 22 gigawatt. But that is, well, it's 20%. Yeah. So it's some reduction. It is some business cases that were no longer business cases, but still there is a lot of activity. And then you have a debate about what about floating wind, because clearly floating wind is much more expensive. And now what is really exploding is a shallow water, it's the Baltic Sea, is the near Germany, near Netherlands, Belgium, all these places, fantastic places to build cheap offshore wind energy. Why should they build it at very, very expensive places? But long term, it's actually reasons to do that. It's because they can achieve higher revenues because they're partly opposite correlated. So we have to look at the revenue side also. But also, of course, it's very scalable when it at some point takes off. But I think we need more innovation. Here, I've seen many new concepts now that are indicating that they can produce floating wind much cheaper than today. But of course, I think it's not really, we are not really in a hurry for it. It will be very important in the 2030s and 40s for the winter supply of electricity in the Northern Hemisphere, in Japan, Korea, China, North America, and Europe. But we are not in a rush to do it. But we have to. So we need some intelligent ways to make people take some technology risks to develop these new concepts that we need.
Is there we're saying so I think you also the point is that hybrid solutions, so you have co-location of solar and batteries, or with wind as well, where you have so you can make the use of the sun and the wind, and then you can save it when there is no sun or wind for later use. But is there, I want to return to what you said about you mentioned Spain or the Iberian blackout. What do you think? It's too soon to draw any conclusions about what exactly happened, but because we're talking at the end of May, but what are there any lessons to be learned here? Do you think it's maybe too much renewables? Can we point the finger at any one cause, or is there something to be said for making the grids as resilient as we can?
We are going to have a big energy shift. We are in the middle of it. It's almost completed in the Nordic countries. Yes, I think it's a lot of learnings. I think there's a lot of, we will have similar accidents. I think it will be children's diseases of the new energy system, basically. So, of course, we need to use all kind of intelligence estimations, simulations to avoid these events to happen. But I'm sure it will happen because that's the way we are learning in a way. So, but in the end, we will end up with an electricity system that is actually robust for even much more growth, no emissions, and stable supply, and at lower prices for end users. A problem with this new, also with the energy transition for the energy business, is that a lot of the value is leaking to the end users in terms of lower energy prices. For a Norwegian family going from a gasoline car to an electric car, typically the bill that you're paying for fuel is 10% of what it used to be. I've just looked at some data now, and a family, they used to pay 15,000, are now paying 1,500 for the fuel cost for your car.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenal change. So it is bringing those.
But that is leakage from the players of in the energy supply chain. So they don't necessarily like that that all this revenue is going away.
Yeah, but exactly, and I think that's a very clear development. We're saying in terms of the grid and the resilience there, I think what you're saying is to make this omelette that we're making, or the energy transition, pardon the metaphor, but you have to break those eggs, and that sometimes that there will be certain instances, brownouts or blackouts. But I think the key is, if I understand you correctly, Jarand, is we learn from those and we move on and make sure that the grid is more robust in the future. A final real question or topic I'd like to touch with you, Jarand, is the role of nuclear. There's been talk, Norway for a couple of years, Denmark, Poland, Italy. What do you make of this discussion at the moment? And certainly, the move towards small modular reactors or SMRs.
Yes. wake me up when something has happened. I'm very positive if someone can wake me up and point on something. But, still the big picture is that the development of nuclear reactors has gone from the West in the 1970s and 80s to the East, now with China and India and also Russia. And the attempts they have in the West has been big failures. Cost increase has been between 50% and 500%. And time increase between 5 and 20 years. So it's been disasters. So then we had to find out something new, something smart. Yes, the concept of a small modular reactors sounds fantastic. The point is we haven't seen any one of them even in an investment decision. So, as I said, wake me up when something is happening. Hopefully they will be able to make an investment decision in Canada this year, Darlington. That's closest to do something. Personally, I think maybe it's more realistic to look at the AP1000 concept from Westinghouse. It's a slightly bigger one because, small modular reactors still they need, from the regulations, they need, for example, they need to be airplane crash secure. They need that kind of protection that is not really scalable. So if you build a small reactor, still you need all that stuff around it. So then it will be even more expensive. So just now they are not even close to be competitive from a cost point of view. But as I said, if they are in 10 years, yes, I would welcome that. But it's a hard competition.
Absolutely, massively hard. I'd just like to round off in a way where we started, Jarand, and then talking about China. What should Europe do to try and compete, to try and keep pace with what's happening in China? What can it learn from what's happening over in Northeast Asia?
Yeah, maybe we can try to do re-engineer what China did to learn from Europe over the last 2-3 decades. If you can't beat them, join them, but maybe try to partner and try to, of course, on one hand, China is a complex, it's a business partner, an important supplier. It is a competitor from business, and it's also a strategic challenge from a geopolitical point of view. So we have to have all of these three topics in our head at the same time. But it could, of course, we can take the benefit of them delivering a lot of cheap goods to us. But in general, in trade, you should avoid that some people get too dominant, because then you could have all kind of monopoly, arrogance, etc. So if we're able to keep their market shares at least below 70%, maybe through some kind of incentives for European producers, I think it is a benefit. But this needs to be done on a pan-European level, I think, because it's difficult for one government or Norway or something to do something to try to play this geopolitical game. Really need to be a big picture incentives. So let's try to cooperate, but also not be completely dependent.
Jarand Rystad, thank you very much for being a guest on Plugged In, the Montel News podcast.
Thank you. Very nice to talk to you.
I hope you found my chat with Jarand informative. Join us next week for the 5th and final episode of our summer CEO series, where I speak to Annegret Gröbel, President of the Council of European Regulators.
Germany is not ready to accept a split of the German bidding zone. The German bidding zone is one of the biggest, or probably the biggest, and is one of the few that has a high liquidity. And we doubt that this brings, in the end, more benefits than it does damage.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Plugged In. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, rate, and follow to make sure you get the latest podcast episodes as soon as we release them every Friday. We'd also love to read your reviews of the podcast. It helps us to keep up to date with what you, our listeners, think of our podcast and what content you want to receive more of. Finally, you can head to montelnews.com for more news and analysis from our team of journalists across Europe and beyond. See you next time.